Welcome, Monica. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Jay, for having me. I'm really excited to have this conversation today, and I'm equally a fan of yours. So looking forward
Oh,
to chatting with you.
this is like a little tick off the bucket list to be here with you. I'm so excited. So let's just jump into these questions. So tell us a little bit more about yourself, your journey to entrepreneurship, and was this path something you always imagined yourself for? Or how'd you get here, basically?
Yeah, I always say that I fell into entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship was never presented to me as a career path. And when I first started on this journey, I used to say, I wish this would have been presented as an option. Maybe I would be more prepared. And I think what I've learned is it's hard to prepare for entrepreneurship. I gave a chat yesterday at the OSU Women's Entrepreneurship Summit, and the title of my session was Entrepreneurship is a Dumpster Fire. And as I've gotten further into the journey, I think one thing that I definitely want to make clear is that I've not figured out all the things. And when I talk to some of my closest business mentors and advisor, they've also not figured out all the things. And as I continue in this journey, I think what has been one of the best resources to have really has been having a community of support around me. I am someone who really just loved books and reading. I've always loved books. I've read, I don't even know how many books over the course of my life, and I will never have time to read all the books I want to read. So really, Fulton Street started from a place of personal passion for me. In college, I was a history major, and books became a very powerful tool for liberation for me. And I found a lot of information about who I was and my place in this country. I moved to Tulsa in 2013 as a Teach for America Corps member, and I was super excited to teach reading, and I was standing in front of a classroom of students who were not excited about reading. And I always tell the story that I really had to do some work to understand what the disconnect was. And ultimately, one of my greatest findings was that our literature lacked diversity. And most books that I was putting in front of my students, most pieces of literature that I was putting in front of my students, showed them a world in which they did not exist. And so I set out to solve that problem. I did what entrepreneurs do. We find a problem, we find a gap, and we create a solution or we fill that gap. And so Fulton Street was really born out of understanding the necessity of diverse literary spaces. And unlike a lot of spaces that say, oh, you're welcome here, we're going to include you and your voice, what we do is we take the voices that exist on the margins of our literary spaces and we center them. Those are the voices that are not only invited to the table, but centered at our table at Fulton Street.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much for the important work you do and for your honesty and being like, this is low key a dumpster fire, but we're just gonna keep going because it's important.
Yeah, high key, no.
Yeah, not low key, high key. So Fulton Street, can you take us back to the early days of Fulton Street and what your role looked like in the beginning and kind of the hardest part stepping into that CEO role?
Yeah. So we actually opened our doors in 2020, and Fulton Street was my maternity leave project. So I was on maternity leave, and I thought, when is a better time to open a bookstore than when I have this time where, I get to be at home with my little one? What we did not see coming was a global pandemic. And so we opened a few weeks into what we originally thought was going to be 8 weeks of hunkering down and then life would return to normal. And we ended up opening and starting a business in what ended up a 2+ year global pandemic in unprecedented times for almost everything that you can imagine. But I will say a lot of times we start our entrepreneurial story when the business opens, when the thing takes off. And I think one thing that I've been reminded of recently was how long the passion and the idea and the seed of Fulton Street had been with me. And when we opened, I remember so many folks from very different points in my life, whether it was when I was in college or when I was working in Denver, Colorado in policy, or even folks here in Oklahoma who were like, I remember you saying this thing, right? Fulton Street had been with me so much longer than 2020 when we opened our doors. I think that phase, I believe it's Adam Grant, I could be wrong, but talks about kind of these two phases of creation. One is first the creation of the idea, all right? We build this world, we build this business, build this concept first in our mind before it comes to life. And so often we're applauded for the second creation, right? Like when it comes to life, when it, has a website or when you have your brick and mortar, when you have a team. And I think that initial phase of creation is just so important to sit in. And so Fulton Street, I really think I started business planning, like really putting pen to paper, maybe in 2015. So even 5 years before we actually got off the ground was when I really started to put those ideas together to eventually lead up to what was Fulton Street. Originally, I wanted a bookstore. I love books. I didn't care about coffee. I used coffee as utility before opening Fulton Street. And one of the points that I made in my chat yesterday that I think is important to bring to the front here is about, it comes from a place of passion and a place of trying to solve a problem that I had identified existed in my community. But what I had to do before I could bring it to life was really balance the passion that I had for books and building community and all of those things with how do we build a business that has some chance at financial sustainability because the books just were not going to do it. And so we decided very early on in the planning stages, and by we, I mean I use that universal we that we often do. Um, Decided to find something that was complementary to the space we wanted to build. We wanted to build community space that was full of literacy where people could come together. And what was most complementary to that, that also had a pretty strong business model, were coffee shops. People commune in coffee shops, they come together, they have their meetings. So we added this piece of coffee to our original business plan around a bookstore. And then we kind of had Fulton Street Books and Coffee. And I always say what I thought I would be doing when I opened a business was sitting in, my cozy little bookstore and reading my cozy little books and drinking my cute little lattes and, talking to customers as they came in about the books I was reading. And I had this very idealized version of what it would be. And I found that entrepreneurship has stretched me in so many ways beyond just the concept that was written on paper. I've had to learn about construction and new builds. I've had to learn accounting. Y'all, I hate math. I've had to learn accounting. But I think at each point when I've dug deeper into the full set of skills that it takes to own, operate, launch, and sustain a business. It has helped me, I think, now in this current phase to start to begin to delegate some of those tasks off my plate with a full understanding of the different pieces of business. So I would say we're a very long way away from where we were in 2020. But also, I think entrepreneurship is iterative. And so there has been a lot of times where I'm like, okay, that thing's off my plate. I've delegated it. It's done. But now that thing's back on my plate. But because I've done the digging, can do all the pieces, I kind of have been in a place of being able to jump in and jump out. I think talking about kind of all those different ways that entrepreneurship stretches you and all the different skill sets you have to learn, and knowing that sometimes when you delegate, that's not the end of it. It may come back and be your project and your task again. Just sets a better expectation for the ups and downs and the ins and out. And, entrepreneurship is not linear. It's often
Yes.
dumpster fire. So definitely been a journey for me in that way as well.
Yeah. And I love how you talked about like your business didn't start in 2020. Like it started years before that in your brain and from your passion. And I think that's so important to remember as entrepreneurs. Like there's so many puzzle pieces to it. But I love that, it's a great reminder to remember why you started, the passion behind it. And also like you said, it's not like this. There's a bunch of pivots, and I think that's something that we like to talk about in our programming. It's just like shifting your perspective, looking a different way, and so thank you so much for sharing all that. Gabby, do we want to break into? You want to share some of the answers from the initial icebreaker?
So as a reminder, we asked for people to share not only their name, their company, but also one thing that they're hoping to get out of this today's session, right? So we had a couple of different answers, including some of the more practical, like the tools that to keep the big mission in mind while taking care of all the daily to-dos, prioritizing tasks, like how to prioritize tasks. And then, of course, we had people that joined that were super excited to just join the community and get some fresh ideas from this community. So I think we'll touch on some of those as well throughout the session. But
Love it. Thank you, Gabby. And thank you guys all for being here. So, Onika, delegation is one of the hardest things for founders. Why do you think letting go feels so challenging?
Yeah, I would often call Fulton Street my other baby, right? And because we have spent so much emotional energy and brain energy and investment into building our businesses, and sometimes you know your business like you know the back of your hand, I think it's hard sometimes to trust that someone else is going to take on a task with the same amount of integrity to your mission and your vision around your business. And so I think trust is a big piece of why sometimes it's hard to let go. I think entrepreneurship too, sometimes we think of entrepreneurship as a solo sport, right? You're out in front, you're leading, you're doing all of these things. And I feel like, at least in my experience, one of the things that I didn't spend a lot of time on in the planning stage was what does the team look like in terms of the skills that we need, all of those things. And I think sometimes we wait until we're overwhelmed to delegate. And so I like to tell folks, don't plan for, that initial team that you may need, your MVP of like, what do we need to get the doors open if you're a brick and mortar, or, what do we need to start if you're a tech or whatever it is. But like, plan for what you're going to need 6 to 12 months ahead, right? Or maybe even a few years ahead, and build that out. And I think so often we think we have to have a full scope of work and we have to know all the things. And, I think we got to give ourselves a little bit of grace and a little bit of flexibility there for things to just kind of be filled as they come and as they need. The other thing is people management and professional development is a huge part of entrepreneurship, right? You have to sometimes, yes, hire for the things you can't train for, but also you have to have the muscle and the skill to build those technical skills or whatever it is that people actually do have to learn on the job. And oftentimes I think we're not prepared to do the work to fully build and manage a team because we're busy building the vision and the mission and building relationships and getting investments and raising funds and all of those things. And I think we equally have to spend as much time building up a team who can support that broader mission and vision. So I think all of those things combined really make delegation hard or challenging for entrepreneurs. The other thing is, I think we think about relationship as if us as a founder, we have to hold all of these relationships close. And one of the things that I've slowly been able to start doing is when I think about relationships and the buckets they fall into, like really map out, is it necessary for me to be the holder of this relationship? Is me holding this relationship as the one that I have to have becoming a bottleneck in my business, right? And after I go through a series of questions, really figuring out, okay, who on my team has the skills most closely connected to the issue or whatever it is that this vendor, this relationship, this organization is providing for us, and how do I slowly start to introduce them as like that is the point of contact, and then being very clear about when that person needs to communicate with me. So I think a lot of it is really just around people management, trust, and being able to let go of this thing is like it's yours, it's your baby, and you have to do all the things.
hmm I love asking yourself that question. And that can be really hard, I think, as you're saying with entrepreneurs, like relationships mean a lot to us, community means a lot to us. But it's important to also understand how much are you able to hold relationship wise. And that's a great advice. Kind of diving deeper into delegation, a lot of founders feel like they can't afford to delegate yet. And how do you suggest they take that first step?
I mean, let's be honest, sometimes you can't afford to delegate, right? Because I don't have anyone I could pay the money that this skill requires me to pay someone in order to be able to do that. So I think one, just being honest that there will be periods of entrepreneurship where you're carrying more than is ideal. But I think even if you're going through a season, planning ahead, this is a season, I'm carrying this extra weight. I'm going to go ahead and plan ahead for when I think I can offload this. And again, build out an imaginary job description. Here's what it takes for me to complete this task. So here's what I'm going to need in a candidate for someone who can take this on at some point when we do have enough funds, or we do have the runway to start to hire. I think sometimes we assume, right, that the issue is that we won't let go. Sometimes, and I say this as a Black woman entrepreneur, and we know the challenges of small business and like access to funding, capital, all of those things. Sometimes we literally don't have the funds. But I think not having the funds should not prevent us from preparing for, future when we may be able to bring that person on and just make that transition a bit easier.
That's a great idea. So even if you can't actively afford somebody to help you out, even writing down every day what you're doing, what that position looks like to set yourself up for success is such a great idea. And I feel like we can forget to do that. Like you said, we get so caught up in it being our baby, doing
Yeah.
everything. I
And
love
I
that.
think it also gives us time to reflect on what we are doing and what we're spending our time on, right? Because it can be easy to feel like I'm overwhelmed, I'm doing so much. Okay, what are you doing? And sometimes we can't answer that in specifics, right? When people say, sometimes I've had friends say, hey, I have a few extra hours. Is there anything you need? I would love to help volunteer. If I haven't done the work of like, here's a task, it's taking this much time, here's what that person needs to do, here's a skill set it takes. When people offer their support, I'm not prepared to delegate. So
Right.
again, even if you don't have the funds in your account today to do it, or even if you don't see the talent pipeline to hire someone that could, go ahead and make up those imaginary job descriptions, figure out how much time you're spending doing tasks that you would like other people to do, and just again, start to plan for future, whether it's you're hiring someone, whether it's you have someone who volunteers, being prepared to offload things is helpful. And I think seeing where you spend your time too, when you start to map out those job descriptions is also really helpful. And it helps you prioritize, right? Okay, I'm spending a lot of time on this thing. I could easily delegate it to someone else. How do I get that off my plate first? So when you are ready, you kind of also have a level of prioritization for what tasks fall off your to-do list first.
I love it because even though it might not feel like progress, you're taking yourself off autopilot. And I
Yep.
think as a founder, entrepreneur, we're on autopilot a lot and just going through the basic motions. So taking yourself out of that mindset is that's such a great idea. How do you set boundaries as a leader to make sure you're not just working in the business, but also taking care of yourself? Woo.
I often struggle with boundaries. I will say the one aid that I have in setting boundaries is that I have a very wild and free 4-year-old that keeps me in check. Okay. And she will remind me that she is actually the boss. And so that kind of helps me check myself for when I may be overworking or bringing work home or doing things where I need to be spending time in other areas of my life. I think it's very easy to fall into grind culture with entrepreneurship. And so setting boundaries, I think early is really important to having sustained boundaries over time. Oftentimes, there are moments at which, for example, coming back from the holidays, I think is an amazing time to kind of reset boundaries. And when thinking about those things, I like to think of it in buckets, right? If these are the, 5 to 7 categories of my life, time with my child, um, time that I need to spend time exercising or, going for hikes or whatever the case is, the time that I need to spend actually working and on my business. Here's the time I want to spend with friends, all of those things, and really figuring out if our values align to the way that we spend time. If I say I want to be a kick-ass mom, does the way that I'm spending my time and my hours align to what I've said my value is? If I say that I want to invest in my team, does the way that I'm spending my time align to that thing that I've stated as a value? And there are, times like the beginning of the year was a great opportunity to have a little step back, look at where you've been spending your time. If you're anything like me, everything is on the calendar. I can take a look back at the last 3 months, kind of map out where I've been spending my time and see if that aligns. Sometimes when we do that, it feels like a waste of time. I'm just spending time thinking about time. Yes, you are, but it will help you use your time more efficiently going forward. As an entrepreneur, we have to build in those times for rest and reset. And that is a part of the process. It can feel productive to just keep working and just keep grinding. And one day you're going to magically look up and there's going to be a light at the end of the tunnel. The tunnel will not end until you take a break and decide where you're going to put that light and where you're going to come up and take that breath. So I think, again, just taking those times to retreat and figure out how you're mapping your time is important. If you don't do that, your schedule will rule you. You will not rule your calendar. The meetings will pile up, the to-dos will pile up. So I think, again, just taking time to rest and restructure as part of the process is so important. Where's the time that I'm spending to actually do the work that I need to do? I've started trying to create Mondays as like, here's where I'm looking ahead for the week or whatever the case is, but this is where I'm going to have some downtime for all those to-dos that are stacking up on my plate. Building in a calendar time for yourself, 10 out of 10, chef's kiss. Mondays from, 11 to 3, there's a block on my calendar for whatever comes up. And if there's nothing, I can figure out how to use that time in some other way. But again, I think just having those moments to reset and restructure are critical to really using your time in the ways that you want to and that align to your needs, and just ensuring that you have those boundaries.
I love that. And I love that you have a little 4-year-old like mini CEO to keep you on track.
Mhm. Mhm.
I love that. We kind of already talked about it a little bit, but maybe just to dive in a little bit deeper about delegating. What's your process for deciding what to delegate and what to keep? And are there any frameworks or questions you ask yourself when deciding what to delegate?
Yeah, I think sometimes there is the lift of offboarding in order to delegate. So I'll use one specific example. We get a lot of our coffee equipment from Topeka. And I have a relationship with the folks over at Topeka, like since the beginning of time of Fulton Street. They helped us get our program off the ground. And so they're near and dear to me and very near and dear to our business. They're an amazing partner that we have. And so for a long time, I was keeping that close. And by keeping that close, y'all, like literally every week, I would log into the system and I'm putting stuff in our cart that we need for the coming week. And, I'm checking out and I didn't need to be. It is a very, I don't know if technical is the right word, but it's a very straightforward, kind of technical, easy task. And it's probably better suited for folks who are in the store every day and actually know what's out of stock and actually know what we're going through quicker. And so that was one scenario where I had to say, okay, yes, it kind of makes me happy to talk with the folks over at Topeka. And yes, we've had a relationship with them forever, but I don't need to be doing this. And when I talk about bottlenecks,
Mhm.
you can be like, hey, we're low on this. Sure, I'm adding it to cart. And we would be running out of stuff because I was becoming a bottleneck just because I wanted to do this thing. And I didn't always get to it on time and I wasn't always close enough to know exactly, what the orders need to be and all the things. And so I had to turn that relationship over. This is going to sound silly to some people. I am not very tech savvy. And so I was like, well, if I bring on another person, that means I have to get their account set up with Topeka and I have to walk them through how to order and da da da. And it's just so much easier for me to just go in and do it every week, right? That was the little block that I had created for myself. I took 30 minutes, walked someone through the process, connecting them with someone over at Topeka to make sure they knew, hey, this is the new contact person. It's off my plate. It's off my plate. It's a small thing, but when I need to be focused on the broader goals, the broader mission, the broader relationships, and bringing in funds and building those relationships, it was something that I shouldn't have had for that long in the first place. There's no loss of relationship between us and Topeka, and our process for inventorying is a lot stronger because I'm now out of the way. And so I think just figuring out what are the things, again, that are taking up your time, that are probably frustrating your team because you're a bottleneck, and that you can easily onboard someone and probably just need to take the time to do it, to get it off your plate, that really help those operations function a little bit better. So I think that's one specific example. I hope that one's helpful. But it was, just a thing that was taking up a lot of time unnecessarily and was fairly easy to onboard, and I just hadn't done it.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I think it goes back to what we're talking about of taking yourself off autopilot, asking yourself, is this worth my time? Could somebody else be doing this instead of, should somebody else be doing this? Because I think with the word should, it can put like pressure on ourselves. I think replacing words with could is
Mhm.
so helpful for me. I want to hop back into the chat. Gabby, is there any questions, comments in the chat?
I did want to highlight just a couple things from the chat, just based on what you were saying, Onika. Definitely people love the idea of building an imaginary job description before you're ready to hire. Super great hack. Also, the idea of using your time wisely and productive, and just that rest is productive, I think really resonated with a couple of the people here today. I know Onelia had a question too in the chat. We mentioned how there are people from different stages on today, and she was wanting to know your advice for maybe people who don't know where to start or have the fear of building their business. Maybe they have an idea, but don't know where to start.
Hi, Anika. It's nice to see you.
So good to see you too.
Yeah, so I work with startups and they have a lot of, participate in our workshops and sometimes they come with the idea, but I have so many of them that sometimes they have that fear to start their business, or sometimes they need a push, somebody that can, give their hand and start. Like, what is like when you start your business, what was that moment that something pushed you to start their business?
Yeah, starting a business sometimes does feel like skydiving, where you're like, no, and you get that final push and you're over the edge and there's nothing you can do. I think just reminding folks that the fear is not going to leave, right? The fear is going to be there. So you can be scared and be like, I'm scared to do it. I have this fear. Or you can be scared and do it at the same time. I think one of the things early on where it's an idea, one, being okay with letting that idea marinate, right? There's nothing wrong with marination. Oftentimes, we approach entrepreneurship from a lens of scarcity. I have to do it now. I have to do it while I have the relationships, while I'm here, while this thing exists. The application for this accelerate ends at this point. And I think once we release ourselves of that urgency, we get to operate in a bit of abundance, right? So as I'm letting this marinate, how do I build a community of support? As I'm letting this marinate, how do I keep forgetting this word. There's like 3 times this morning that I've wanted to use it, fire tested or whatever, when you run it through the traps just to make sure that it can withstand, right? How do I bring together my friends around like investing them in this idea or using them as like, tell me all the reasons I shouldn't do this. And if it can withstand that, like there are things that we can be doing that are very productive as we're letting something marinate. And to what I said earlier, the fear is not going away. And to join fear, you're going to maybe get some anxiety and some stress and some, like all of those things. I tell folks like jump. And if you've done the work of building community, your community is going to catch you. One piece of advice that I heard at it was like a training workshop or something. I was trying to figure out if a particular concept will work. And I was like, well, how do I know if, this thing would work in the market? And they said, well, you don't know. You don't know until you do it. So you can sit there with the unanswered questions or see entrepreneurship as experimentation. And we're like, I'm going to launch an experiment and see if this thing works. Sometimes you will never know unless you bring it to life. I talked about this yesterday in my chat, but redefining our relationship with failure. And it can feel like a privilege, right? Some of us don't feel like we have the chance, the resources to fail and learn from that and keep moving forward. But we really do have to redefine our relationship with failure. If you launch the concept, if you've done the, testing, you launch the concept, you've built the relationships, all the things, and it does not work. What are you learning from that experience to evolve that into the next thing, right? Failure is not full failure. We're taking those lessons and building something that hopefully is stronger the next round. If you have a passion, a purpose, a desire to bring something to life, it may not look the same. Fulton Street does not look like what I thought it would look like on paper. If I go look at those early business plans, I'm telling you, never in my life would I have thought, like, what are we doing? Now we got sandwiches. What is this? So I think really just like being open, being flexible. But again, at some point you have to jump and no one can really decide that for you. You just have to, well, unless they push you, but no one can really decide that for you. You just have to be willing to say, okay, now is the time I'm going to take the risk and operate from a place of abundance.
Great question, Anelia. Thank you. We also had a question from Shondell. She mentioned she's new to entrepreneur or to ownership, to business ownership. And there is this, of course, idea of wearing all the hats, right? So how do you prioritize all the things you have to do?
I'm just like, I feel the need to already be done with the growth. I need to be on the other side of it. I need to do all of this to market myself, and I need to do this to learn this. And how do I kind of figure out where to start? Because I feel the need to do everything all at once right now and be excellent at it.
No, I get that feeling and that anxiety. I will say this. I am not a type A person and I'm not a perfectionist. And those things have worked very well in my favor. I am someone who's like, the ducks aren't all in a row, but they're here and we're crossing. So I think sometimes getting out of our own way in terms of like being perfect and having everything lined up. I'll share with you one practice that I do that is very counter to where you're trying to be. Sometimes there's so much on my plate and I'll spend too much time trying to prioritize and figure out what I want to do first. And by the time I've done that, I could have knocked 10 things off the to-do list. Usually it's a weekend, and usually it's when I have a little bit of free time. I have what I like to call a just keep moving campaign. I'm not prioritizing. I'm just let me look at this list and just start doing things for whatever the allotted amount of time is. And I'm not going to stop until I do those things. And once I get to the end of that, then we're going to sit back, look at what I've done, and then try to prioritize for the next round of time that I have. That feels very counter. Sometimes we want to be so perfect in our approach. Well, I have to prioritize and figure out what I'm going to do first and where sometimes I just have my just keep moving campaign just to get things done. And that's not just for entrepreneurship or my business, right? Sometimes it's home. I need to do laundry. I got to clean up. I got to do the mail. I got to pay this toll ticket because they didn't sent me 3 reminders that I need to pay the toll for when I was driving. See, sometimes it can be for any aspect of life. So I think, again, just removing ourselves from the idea of perfection. I have so many business mentors who I look at them and I'm like, they've got everything figured out. And as we've built relationships over time, I'm like, they're in the dumpster fire with me. We are trying to figure it out. I've not met a person in entrepreneurship who has been perfect. I don't say that to say don't plan and don't prioritize, but I think sometimes we just have to release ourselves from the weight of having it all figured out before moving forward.
I love that. We think that adults have everything together, and then we become adults and we're like, what? No, we do not know what we're
I never
doing
had it.
either. Yeah. So I love that. That ties that back in. Thank you so much. And thank you for
Of
being
course.
here.
Of course. Thank you. Thank you for the question.
Great question, Shondell. I want to highlight one more question too. Meredith mentioned in the chat, she would love to hear about what systems you have in place to support your time management. So maybe some more practical tips and tricks.
To kind of piggyback on what Chandel said, I feel like I'm wearing all of the hats, and I know, I'm trying to build systems for efficiency, and I don't know, just kind of finding out what has helped others that are also feeling that kind of pressure. So
one of the small things that I have been able to be consistent with that has helped with some of that time management is honestly like low tech, the Notes app. Oftentimes what can be overwhelming is the mental burden that we're carrying of just like all the things that ticker tape in the back of your mind. That's just like, oh, I have to do this and I have to do this and I know I have to, and you're carrying those things in your head. I use the Notes app, and whenever I think of one of those things, I just throw it in my to-do. And if you want to be extra special about it, like put in dates or who can help with this, or I need to reach out to this person. I love that we can now schedule text messages if you have that update. It has been a game changer. But I think just kind of sometimes relieving ourselves of some of it or lightening the burden is just getting out of our head and onto somewhere. I have folks who I will text and now schedule texts and, hey, I'm sending this to you so I don't forget that this is a thing that needs to be done. And once I do that, I can kind of take the burden of getting that thing off. So I think that's a low lift, low tech one. Programs like Asana are really helpful to me as a visual person who wants to be able to categorize things and put them here and assign and collaboratively work with other people. That's been helpful when I think about, to-dos and partnerships and collaboration across our team. So I think, yeah, there are tech tools, there are small things. I know people who just make lists. There's a lot of tools out there. One of the things I do want to mention, because I think this has been helpful for me too, is Enneagram, which doesn't seem like this is going to help me with time management, whatever the case is, but figuring out the personalities and the people that you have around you and on your team and what some of their skills may be and interests may be and how to communicate with those folks. I'm an Aries, I'm an Enneagram 8. Sometimes I come in a little hot and I'm not really thinking about it. But being able to communicate tasks in a way that other people are able to take them on and own them has been really helpful too in terms of just relieving some things off my plate.
Thank you so much. I really love the idea of like the low tech, just with the notes, just getting the brain dump. So that way you can like stop that ticker tape.
Exactly. Sometimes it's like there's so much to do and you get it out on paper. It's like, actually, no, there's a big thing and then there's like 3 little things, right? And sometimes it's like SHIT, there's a lot to do. How do I? And then it's like I have it somewhere and I can call on other people to kind of help get that list down a little bit.
I think that our to-do lists are gonna, no matter if they are a lot or little, they are going to feel 10 times more if they're just only in your brain. Okay, Onika, these are just rapid fire questions. So I'm gonna just ask you and kind of give me your first thing that comes to your brain. What's one leadership book, podcast, or resource you'd recommend?
I love Originals by Adam Grant.
What's one daily habit that helps you stay focused as a CEO?
Eating, taking time to eat and drink water. Do not
That's
forget to eat.
such a good one. I hope all of you heard that. Please feed yourselves and
Yes.
drink some water. You deserve it.
Yes. And you will show up as a less grumpy and more productive person.
So true. So true. What's the first thing you ended up delegating or outsourcing?
Oh, the first thing, I don't know if it was, I don't know, making coffee, being a barista, ordering books.
What's one tool or system that help you get things off your plate? I know you kind of mentioned a few, but
Notes app.
Notes app.
Yeah.
What's one underrated business tool or resource you swear by?
Enneagram. I think the way it allows us to see a mirror of ourselves. I'm someone who loves feedback, and I appreciate very direct, honest, open feedback in a way that allows me to improve in certain ways. And so I think the Enneagram, as much as it's a reflection tool for me about how I show up, how I operate in my business, it has also helped me better communicate with other folks just by kind of knowing some of those things. I swear by the Enneagram. I think it's an amazing tool, especially for us that work with people. We should all be using Enneagram.
I love Enneagram. What is the best advice you've ever received as an entrepreneur?
Best advice I've ever received. One of the best pieces of advice was to get a good accountant. Have good accounting. If you don't have that skill set yourself, make sure you have a really, really strong accountant.
How do you personally handle self-doubt when or if it creeps in?
Yeah, I think I've gotten to peek under the hood. I think I've gotten to peek under the hood, and I can't take credit for this. Michelle Obama said this. Sometimes we think that there are people up there and out there that are smarter, that have more skill, that are brighter, that are more qualified. And I just remind myself that they're not, right? That I actually have the skills, the talent, and if I don't have it, I have a community of people and people to lean on who do have those skills, those resources, and the talent. So I'm not someone who really has imposter syndrome. Sometimes I feel like, oh, the space was not created for me, but never, I don't deserve to be in this space. And I think just reminding ourselves if we're here, likely we're competent enough to be here. And even if we don't have the skills or the knowledge, our brains are flexible and resilient enough to learn the things.
Love it. Love it so much. If you could go back to your first year in business, what's one thing you do differently?
I'd pay myself.
Oh, yes.
I'd put myself on payroll and not treat the business. So Fulton Street, I always say less than a vehicle for individual wealth creation. We're truly a platform for community. I think I took that too far, right? And I sacrificed so much of myself. So prioritizing, I think, me as part of the business early on is something that I would have loved to go back and do.
Well, thank you so much, Onika. If anybody here has a question they want to ask Onika, please feel free.
How do you like stop yourself from pressuring yourself while you're trying to build your company? Because I think sometimes it's me, that presses myself to push on harder, and I kind of overwhelm myself, when I do that. And I was wanting to know if you had any tips on how to prevent that or how to stop doing that.
I don't know if I have any good ones. I think, part of self-care can be therapy. And so honestly, sometimes my therapist has reminded me about the undue pressures that I place on myself, the expectations that only I have for myself that no one else knows about, the internal deadlines that I've set, and therefore I can change to relieve some of that pressure on myself. I think sometimes one of the things that weighs heavy for me is I don't wear lightly being a Black-owned business in Greenwood and Black Wall Street and feel like, oh my gosh, if I do anything wrong, if I fail, like I'm failing a whole community. And so I think just reducing myself of some of that burden. And there are a lot of therapeutic practices, grounding, staying present that have really kind of helped do that. But it is kind of the big bad monster under the bed, right? We are sometimes our own big bad monster underneath the bed, worrying ourselves about things that no one else is even thinking about or sees half the time.
Great question, Henry, and I think super relevant to just whether it's our internal pressures or maybe seeing others and thinking we need to be at a certain point where we're not. So yeah, definitely a question that comes up. So thank you for sharing.
I have a question. You mentioned that you work so hard thinking that you're just going to get to something and then the tunnel never ends. And that really registered with me because I always feel like the day is just an ongoing day. Like you're never caught up. Like I always feel 2 steps behind and there's always something else. How do you change your mindset or that just a better way to think about it?
Yeah, I hope this kind of answers your question. There was it was Stacey Abrams who brought this up. And again, I think it's about reducing like our expectations for perfectionism and all those things. But sometimes we use the analogy of like we're juggling a bunch of balls or work-life balance or whatever the case is. And she kind of was honest and she said, there really is no balance. This is Jenga. At some point, it's going to fall over, and our job is to make sure that the things that fall are rubber and not glass or something. So they're things that bounce or not things that break. There are going to be times where we drop the ball. I've gotten a lot better at apologizing, even though y'all, as an Aries, I don't want to apologize. I don't ever want to apologize. I don't even want to be wrong, right? But I've gotten really good at learning how to apologize, make things right, mend a relationship and kind of move forward when things drop. And that took having some grace with myself. So I think, again, just really like setting the expectation that sometimes things are going to fall. Let's try to make sure they're the things that bounce and not the things that break. Otherwise, you will continue to be in that cycle of like, I have to do all the things all the time. Also, learning to under promise and over deliver, right? So sometimes we set the bar really high for ourselves. Like, I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to get you this by this date. And run it back a little bit, maybe just like under promise. And so once we start to under promise, we lower the expectations for ourselves a little bit and we start to exceed those things and just better level set about what our actual capacity is. I think sometimes we think we can do all the things and we actually don't have time to do all the things. So rubber, glass, level setting, learning how to apologize, my least favorite thing, and kind of really moving on.
Onika, I know you dropped your email in the chat. How else can we follow your work?
You can follow Fulton Street. We love folks to engage on our Instagram. We're at Fulton Street 918 on Instagram. And there should be a link in the link in bio to sign up for our newsletter where we try to and often fail to send out newsletters with all the things that are going on at Fulton Street.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you guys all for coming. Thank you so much, Onika. You have so much insight and so much grace. And I just really, I got chills a few times throughout just the words that you say. And I'm like, oh yeah, it's because she reads like she reads all the time.
Thank you, Jay. It's always a pleasure to be in conversation with you. I love the work that you all are doing. I love that y'all are helping people build communities of support. I definitely don't have it all figured out. So if it ever comes across like she's got it all figured out, trust me. It's always evolving. It's always a work in progress, but I'm always open to share, the little bit of nuggets and pieces of advice that I do have.